From the very beginning, Newcastle has been a nucleus of revolution. A city of grafters, the Toon has always been up for the fight. And as a new revolution sweeps the sporting world, Newcastle is once again at the epicentre.
And the world is watching!
On June the 8th, Newcastle's 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘 plays host to a new era of mixed martial arts. As the world's fastest growing promotion comes to the Toon. One night, 15 fights with plenty on the line.
Like nothing else I've ever seen. Oh, there it is!
We've got crossover. The undisputed boxing champion of the world, Savannah Marshall, makes her global MMA debut against experienced grappler and kickboxer 𝗟𝗟𝗏𝗂𝗡 of Brazil. Savannah wants to meet Clarissa again. She's a local hero with global ambitions.
Everybody is on their feet.
We've got the next generation of exciting mixed martial artists. We've got the female fighters looking to grow women's fight sports and inspire a generation. We've got bad blood.
Smash up your neck.
We've got returning champions. This is one event in the grueling PFL Europe season where fighters can become global stars.
Crowd, the energy, I've never experienced anything like it.
With 16 nations represented, 9 win or go home fights, and the MMA debut of Savannah Marshall topping the bill, you don't want to miss it. Live from the Utilita Arena, Newcastle, on Saturday, June the 8th. This is Europe's MMA League. This is PFL Europe.
Hello, one and all. Andy Shepherd and the Outlaw, Dan Hardy here. And it's fight week in Newcastle. It's PFL Europe, our second half of the regular season. And Dan, I say this every time we talk about these PFL Europe cards, but you're putting these cards together. It is stacked, quite literally stacked, because to my knowledge, it's the biggest card, the most amount of fights that PFL have ever had. You've been working overtime, haven't you?
Well, you know, there were just so many fighters that I didn't want to leave off this card. And what you've got to bear in mind, so we've got 4 fights in the women's flyweight division. We've got 4 in the men's bantamweight division. Then we adopted a welterweight fight from Paris because that didn't happen. And we need a result there. So we've got an opponent for Florian Zendelli in Glasgow, September 28th. So there's a lot of regular season fights on this one. And then, you know, just some great showcases, some new fighters that PFL fans have not yet seen, and of course the main and co-main event, which are very exciting.
And that you haven't got to explain yourself to me or anyone else. You have put together an absolute treat of a night. You just mentioned our main event there. Savannah Marshall, 2-weight world boxing champion, 2-time Olympian, one of the greatest female boxers on the planet. She's going to be making her MMA debut here in Newcastle. How excited are you for that?
I'm really excited. I mean, you know, we saw how impressive she was as a boxer, and I feel like I've been rewatching her career as well in the build up to this Newcastle event. I very much feel like her style of boxing, of fighting, is really suited to MMA. You know, she's really aggressive on the front foot. She's a real bully, and she can punch. You take the 10-ounce gloves off, and you put some 4-ounce on, and that's a very, very dangerous individual. And, you know, the fact that she's working with Tom and Andy Aspinall as well, you know for sure that her training, her preparation is all built around making sure that her hands can flow freely.
We're going to talk more about that fight a little bit later on, but there is so much to talk about. Of course, so much of the focus in Newcastle this week will be on the season, second half of the regular season. Let's talk about the bantamweight bracket, first of all.
Out of 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘, Germany, 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘.
He's in big trouble here. 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘 in the yellow trunks, 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘 in the gray. The dropping right hand, and now 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣 wailing away. Very interesting stylistic matchup. Do not blink in this fight.
𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘, last year's inaugural champion, coming back, looking to do it 2 years in a row. Would you say he's the favourite at this point with that experience?
He's certainly the one that everyone's got their eye on. Yeah, I mean, there are some really good new faces in this bracket. The likes of Dean Garnett and Luke Shanks, really talented fighters that are joining the PFL for the first time. I know for sure that they're both looking at Kakarov as the guy to beat. So there is something to be said for being the returning champion, but at the same time, Kakarov's in a new pool of very different fighters this time around, and there are going to be different challenges that he needs to solve. And the guys around him have got a lot of experience in comparison to him.
I think it says so much about this league system that the PFL have, that veterans, you mentioned Dean Garnett there, we got Don Wooding as well stepping into this bracket. The veterans are seeing this as a challenge they want to take up at this point in their career. Let's talk about Dean Garnett. He's been away for a while. He's had some breaks from mixed martial arts. He's come back and he seems very focused and determined to add gold to himself at this point in his career.
I think he sees this as an opportunity to really establish himself as as one of the best fighters from the UK. Dean, everybody speaks so highly about his skill set. Anyone that's trained with him talks about how technically proficient he is everywhere. And, the other thing as well is that, Dean spent a lot of time coaching. He spent a lot of time working with Mohamed Mokaev and a lot of the other fighters that came through as amateurs and are doing really well as pros now. And I do feel like that time that he spent coaching younger fighters and, imparting the knowledge that he already had has really helped him integrate it better into his own game. I certainly know that I learn better when I'm trying to teach it back to somebody as well. You know what I mean? If I've got an idea of a technique and I'm trying to explain it to somebody else, I tend to, have a better, deeper understanding. And for me, Dean Garnett is at that stage in his career where, he's got the experience of a fighter and a coach, and he's got all the skills he needs to go and get that PFL Europe title.
For you as the matchmaker, what's the reception been like from fighters this year as opposed to last? Of course, last year was a bit of an unknown factor, this kind of season format. It proved itself in spades last year. When you've approached fighters, or they've approached you, shall we say, has it been an easier ask? Are there more people now knocking on your door to get involved?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, especially now people have seen the big check and the gold belts. I don't think there's a fighter in Europe that wouldn't want to get their hands on that European title. And I think now, especially now people know what the format is, they have a better understanding of what would be expected of them to win the belt. A lot of fighters from last season wanted to come back. Of course, there was only space for a few of them because I wanted to introduce some new fighters to the divisions as well. But I think we're very fortunate to have Kakarov coming back to try and win the title again. We had the same thing with 𝗟𝗑𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗑, who's, he had a very tough but a successful fight against Kane Musa, who's on this card. Kazuba was last year's lightweight champion. He's now returned to win the belt again, and he's already progressed through to the playoffs. So, people can see that, the path that he took last year and what he was able to achieve. Same thing with Kakarov, and they feel like they can compete and do the same thing. So, honestly, I think it's going to get to the stage where we're going to need more spaces in the brackets and probably more regular season fights to match what they do on the global scene, because there are a lot of fighters that really desperate to get some activity in the PFL.
Man, I would love to see that. More fights with PFL Europe. You talk about fighters wanting to return. A competitor who wanted to and indeed was due to be back in PFL Europe was Frans Malambo. Last minute dropout. I think some visa issues with him going on, but that opens a door for another veteran of the sport. We've got Don Wooding coming in against Luke Shanks. Don Wooding, a real opportunity for him, hey?
A really good opportunity and a fight that the fans are going to be interested in, given the fact that both of these have already achieved so much on the UK and European scene. Both former Cage Warriors champions, both very, very well respected across Europe and across the UK. It's unfortunate that Frans is not able to compete in this first regular season, but I'm going to try and figure out a way of hopefully getting him involved later on in the year if he's got his travel and visa situation sorted out. And in the meantime, the door opens for Dom Wooding, and Dom's had a really rough time of it in the PFL. He was due to be in the bracket last year. He got injured in the lead up to the first regular season event, and then He came in Dublin last year to try and re-qualify and was beaten by a very tough 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘. The fact that Dom's not had the success that people are expecting is really motivating him, and he's got an opportunity now. He steps back into the bracket short notice. If he can beat 𝗟𝗡𝗥𝗡𝗥, which is a very interesting local fight for the UK, that's a big statement for Dom and would really help to get him back on track. But on the other side, 𝗟𝗡𝗥𝗡𝗥 is a dangerous fighter in his own right, one of the most highly ranked fighters that we have in the UK. Spent a bit of time out, joined the military. He's conditioning, his maturity is on a different level to how it was earlier in his career. And for me, this is one of the most exciting fights on the card because I have a great deal of respect for both of these guys and their skill sets. And I feel like it's going to be really competitive.
Dan, I'm just looking at the card. I've got it here in front of me. I've got to say, if I had a hat, I'd be tipping it to you. It really is a who's who of bantamweights on the European scene. And it feels like, I think, again, it's a testament to PFL Europe, how this brand is continuing to grow, that we're getting the kind of talent that you are in here. Do you feel like this is an even more challenging bracket than last year?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. I do. And and there are other fighters around that are waiting on the sidelines to get in as well that would continue to make this a very, very difficult bracket.
I know your DMs. I know your WhatsApp, your DMs, everything, your emails, the pigeons coming through your window. It seems everyone is getting in contact with you to get involved.
All of it. Any way people can get a hold of me right now, even through friends, they're like, oh, by the way, I know this kid such and such. It's good, but there's so many fighters that want activity. That's what I'm seeing here, and I just wish that we had more events that we could host them. I mean, what I've done with this card, so I've got veterans of the game like Dean Garnett, like 𝗟𝗘𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘. I've got very familiar European, UK ranked fighters like Dom Woodin, like 𝗟𝗡𝗥𝗡𝗥. And then I've got a couple of new faces as well. Like, not many people, outside of Germany know who Alex Luster is. But when you see him perform, when you see how skilled this young man is, you'll see why I've signed him. And then he's taking on 𝗟𝗘𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘 from Turkey, who's got a real good following, and he's a very exciting, aggressive fighter. So we've got a real mix in this one. The returning champ, we've got some veterans, some highly ranked fighters across Europe, and then we've got some new faces that could really surprise everybody. It's a wide open bracket.
Let's dig into that matchup you just mentioned, the Alexander versus Alperen contest. As you say, maybe not a lot of people have really heard of Alexander Luster so much. What's his background and what have you seen in him that made you want to bring him into the Europe setup?
Well, he came through the GMC promotion in Germany, who they've always put together good cards. I've got a subscription to their streaming service, so I try and catch as many of their events as I can. Dennis, the promoter, does a really good job, and we've seen other fighters come through. In Berlin last year, we had Lorena Cabero, who she gave a really good fight against 𝗟𝗥𝗡𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗅. She's been competing in a lot of other martial arts competitions since we saw in the PFL. She's doing really well. Christina Breuer, another fighter from GMC as well. Like they just have a good pedigree of fighters there, and having watched Luster's career so far, I feel like he could go a long way. I mean, this is a tough fight because 𝗟𝗥𝗡𝗥 is going to be a handful. He is for every single fighter on this card, just because he's a firecracker. He's a bit of a wild kid. And he has a big following, a lot of support as well, so he has a lot to live up to. But for me, both of these guys, regardless of what happens on June 8th, they've got a bright future. I just wanted to get them both in this bracket, so there's at least a prospect in there to cause an upset.
Well, look, this bantamweight bracket is just an embarrassment of riches. Can 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘 go 2 years in a row and win it once again? Or again, I think you can probably put a pin in any one of those names. They could be a potential champion come the end of 2024. Now let's move on to the women's flyweight division, Dan. And I want to call this the star-making division because we've seen what's happened to last year's champion, 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘, what she's done in the States and just how her profile has grown since she claimed that championship last year. Of course, the woman she beat in the final, Valentina Skatici, is back once again. We know that she would love to go one further and win that. But look, also, the likes of Chanel Dyer are coming in. This is, again, I mean, I just talked about the bantamweights. This, again, is just such a competitive and high-level bracket.
It really is. I mean, Chanel spent a lot of time recently. I mean, she's been sparring with my wife Veronica ahead of her fight recently, and we know how dangerous Chanel is and how skilled her striking is. She's also been training a lot recently with Molly McCann as well. So you can imagine how much she's improving, from one fight to the next. Every time she gets in there, it's a Muay Thai extravaganza. She is a very, very sharp, dangerous fighter, and she's certainly the one to watch in this bracket. But, at the same time, you've got Valentina Skittizia returning. She was unsuccessful against Dakota, but she showed tremendous toughness. And she was only able to compete a couple of times last year because, of course, she lost her opponent in the playoffs, and she got a bye there. So her activity wasn't where she would want it to be. And this is the start of 3 fights in 6 months. So it's a good opportunity for Skittizia to really get that momentum back on her side. We've also got Lizzie Havers returning, and she's coming off a good win. So there's some good fighters in this bracket, and I also got to give Mariam a shout out as well, taking on Chanel Dyer in the first round. I mean, this could potentially determine one of the finalists in this first bracket because they're both very skilled, very experienced. I think this is the fight that all of the other women's flyweights will be watching to kind of see who's going to be the toughest test in this year's tournament.
How difficult is it for you as a matchmaker to make these opening round matches? Again, you've got such talent there. How difficult is it for you to be like, right, that person versus that person and so forth?
It depends. I mean, sometimes it can be more difficult than others, depending on the type of the division that it is. With this women's flyweight division, they're all relatively evenly matched. This would have been quite an easy one to kind of mix up and match in other ways. On the other side, with the bantamweights, I wouldn't want to say bring in a prospect for their first time in the PFL and have them taking on someone that's had many fights in the PFL before, someone that was in the bracket last year. And that's why Luster versus Carabal makes a lot of sense to me. Dean Garnett versus Ēton de Pepe makes sense because they're both making their debuts, but they're also both at very similar stages of their career. I think ultimately, and this is me kind of forward thinking, but ultimately, I think the best way to do it would be to get the 8 fighters in the bracket and then do a live draw at the start of the year, and then it's completely out of my hands, because what I'm trying to do ultimately is find 8 people that could go into this tournament and win it, and that means it's exciting for me because it means I can kind of hands off the wheel and see what happens, see how it plays out. And that's why the brackets are made before the tournament starts. So once the initial matchups are made, then I can just kind of hands off and allow the brackets to play out themselves. But there's certainly ways that I think I could be tweaking it in the future to add more fighters to it, to make it more chaotic, a bit more random.
I think that'd be lovely. You talked earlier about expanding the season as we do in the States, having 2 regular season contests, and I think from me as a fan's point of view, having that live random draw, particularly for the first half of the regular season, would be great. Would really just throw things in turmoil and really show truly that you just got to put together a body of work over these few months to become the champion. Let's rewind a little bit to Chanel Dyer. I think apart from Savannah Marshall, she's one of the competitors getting the most attention going into this card. She's got a long history in the UK, both in the amateurs, both in kickboxing. She's been on documentaries on the BBC and so forth. A lot of expectation from Chanel Dyer. Do you think that it's time for her to shine now? Do you think she's ready to live up to the expectation?
Absolutely. I think, honestly, if she wasn't given a challenge like a European title in front of her, I think she would start to get frustrated and lose some momentum with her training. She's at that stage now where everybody that she steps in there against, she feels like she's technically better than them, and she feels like it's only a matter of time before she takes over the fight. With a European title on the line and with $100,000, which makes a big difference for these young fighters in their preparations for the future. It takes some of the pressure off. It means that she can open up 2025 as a European champion and either stick around and try and beat the next upcoming talent in the flyweight division, or maybe even move over onto the global roster if she's ready for that. But it shows progress. And I think if you're a young fighter at Chanel's level of skill and technical ability, you need to feel like there's a good challenge coming up. And this bracket, certainly, I mean, this first fight with Mariam is going to be a real tough one. And then we'll see who presents themselves on the other side of the bracket as the difficult test. But honestly, if Chanel wins this European title, she's going to be gunning for a world title next. I know it.
I mean, as 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘 is this year, she won this title last year. Let's mention her for a moment. When you look at what she's doing across in the States, how proud are you that you're the one who sort of brought her in? The European season last year cultivated her, gave her the platform, gave her the experience, and now, we saw her opening round match early this year. It was a stunning performance.
Yeah, I mean, she's really living up to the expectations and the hype train that's following her as well. I mean, it's the best thing about it for me is that it proves the PFL Europe format. Like we've just started PFL MENA as well, and they've had a really successful first event, and they're doing the same thing that we are in Europe. They are trying to find the best regional fighters to promote to the global roster, and ultimately, like we're the first people doing it in Europe. The PFL MENA crew are the second. Soon we're going to have regional titles around the world that people can challenge for, that will prove as a pathway to the global roster. But like what Dakota proven is that she's the European champion. She's the best in Europe, and now she's gone over onto the global roster against some of the toughest fighters in the world. I mean, 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗡 is in that category. Like if Dakota beats 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗡, she's like clearly one of the best flyweights. Well, certainly the best flyweight on the PFL roster, and one of the best in the world. And she's done that by coming through PFL Europe. It just validates the pathway for everybody, in my opinion. And Dakota's still at the very beginning of her career. It's exciting for the likes of Chanel Dyer to see where Dakota is, and still wonder what height she's going to achieve in the future.
Yeah, these regional leagues that PFL are building, as you say, PFL Europe, PFL MENA, we've got Africa, Australia, and a whole swell of them coming over the next couple of years. They really are stars of the future. And we see with Dakota that just last year she was here in Europe. Now she's across in the States, and who knows how that season's going to play out, but I think she's certainly in with a chance of claiming that world championship. Look, who's going to win the women's flyweight tournament this year? We don't know. We're going to find out, but it's certainly another stacked division.
Fighting out of Grimsby, England, Jack Raw!
Charlie 917 Throwback with plenty of his own. Look for the uppercut. Then that right hand. That's a really good shot. Charlie Leary again.
Graham definitely has the knockout advantage on his resume. Excellent control here by Jack Graham. Really controlling the fight.
Another category we've got here in Newcastle is a little pickup matchup from earlier in the year. Jack Grant versus Charlie Leary. Just fill us in on why is that welterweight contest on this card? What happened?
So initially in Paris, we had a matchup between Marian Dimitrov of Bulgaria and 𝗟𝗃𝗏𝗏 of Austria. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 missed weight. Mariam was offered another fight. Andreas Binder offered to step up to welterweight and fight him. But he decided he didn't want to take that fight. I was keen to give him a second opportunity to stay in the welterweight bracket, because he did make weight in Paris. So I gave him the opportunity to fight on the Newcastle card, and he didn't seem keen. And I don't want to keep people, within these brackets, because it's a hard thing to do, especially if you're fighting in the second half of the year. Like Jack Grant, if he's successful, he's going to fight 3 times in the next 6 months, and he'll have a European title. It's a big ask. So I want to make sure that these people are going to be keen to take on that challenge. Jack Grant gave a great performance against Lazy King. I want to give him an opportunity to get into this European bracket. And, it was a case of trying to find an opponent for him. And we had a couple of good options. They fell out, and, kept digging. And all of a sudden, Charlie Leary stepped out of nowhere. And I'm like, why didn't I find this guy in the first place? I mean, talk about a battle of grizzled UK veterans of the game. Like, these guys are going to take chunks out of one another. And like, of course, Jack Grant gave a great performance against Lazy King. We have not seen a fraction of his game yet. And I think coming off that frustrating loss, he's going to be on top form. And Charlie Leary is always game. He's going to stand his ground. He's going to give as good as he can get. And this fight can transition through ranges quicker than a lot of other ones on the card, just given the fact that both of these guys are so well-rounded and experienced.
Yeah, this is a fight that I'm so looking forward to. 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘, as you say, is just always game for it. And following Jack's performance against the Lazy King, man, that was eye-opening. If you hadn't heard about Jack before that, you certainly knew what he was. When you talk about putting him into the tournament, was that something he reached out to you about, or was that an idea you had when you saw an opening? How did that come about?
Jack's at the stage of his career where he's looking for those big opportunities. And that's why I reached out to him for the Lazy King fight, because, I knew that he would want to take that challenge of 𝗟𝗚𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗡 and his incredible grappling skills. But the thing is with Jack Grant, I always feel like his best performance is around the corner. Like we watched what he did against Lazy King, and I'm like, man, he had such good moments in that fight. He was so game all the way through. He was entertaining, even though he was the away side fighter coming in to take on Lazy King in Paris. And he spoke so well for himself. I feel like the best performances of Jack Grant are in the near future, and I'm hoping that we get those performances as he's fighting for the PFL Europe title. He's just a very skilled, well-rounded individual, and he's like, if you look at the other fighters in the bracket, like there are some fighters that are going to look at Jack Grant and go, oh my goodness, that's just changed the dynamic of the bracket entirely. But then, 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗡 might surprise everybody and come out on top as well. So the guy that's going to be watching this fight is going to be Florian Zendelli, because he's the fighter that's already progressed through to the playoffs, and he's the one that doesn't have the opponent. On the other side, we've got Ibrahim Man against Daniel Miseli. Another great fight, but Zendelli is the one that's going to be fighting the winner of Jack Grant versus 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗡. And he's going to be hoping that it's a tough fight, because he has to fight him in September, and a hard fight might slow their training camp down a little bit and give him the head start.
Danny, just mentioning those names, I'm thinking about the permutations that we might have moving forward. The way this season is even starting to shape up now is just mind-blowing. Thank you for all of us, Mr. Hardy. Look, we got those season contests on our card in Newcastle this week, but also just a wealth of showcase bouts as well. I want to talk about the top 3 fights in just a moment, but we've got a lot of Scottish representation, British representation, a lot of people you're bringing in looking to give them a platform.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of going up from the bottom of the card. I mean, third fight tonight is going to be Ben Wallace, who's one of the best strikers that you're ever going to see in combat sports. 2-time kickboxing world champion, very, very slick striker. Trains at Renegade alongside Leon Edwards, and his grappling game is really, really coming up. Undefeated as a pro, he's stepping in to make his PFL debut, and he's taking on a really dangerous French fighter in 𝗟𝗚𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗑𝗦, who's most likely going to want to challenge Ben's striking ability, and we'll see how that plays out. But that's going to be a fun one. We've got Mark Ewan. He's taking on Claudio Pasea, who had a great fight against Patrick Habarori in Paris. Ibrahim Ibragimov taking on the veteran Josh Reed. Josh Reed, and kind of similar to Jack Grant in the way that, like, I always feel like his next performance is going to be his best one. Like he's got so much experience and so many skills, but then he's coming in against Ibra, who's undefeated 6-0, dangerous, strong, top game wrestler. Josh Reed's going to need his submission skills in that one. I mean, that's just the undercard.
Am I right in thinking that Ibrahim's been out in Russia training? Or
yeah, as he's been working with Khabib, which is just even more terrifying. And that camp, of course, is really busy at the moment because Makhachev's been in camp. So I would imagine that to be on the mat with those guys at the moment, not only is it an absolute nightmare of a training session, it's the wealth of knowledge will be incredible.
I mean, just knowing someone's been in that camp, putting the work in, just walking into the cage against them, that's got to put some nerves inside you. But look, again, so many fights for us to be looking forward to this weekend in Newcastle. But okay, let's talk about our top 3 fights now, because these are very intriguing. The return of the McGrizzler, Lewis McGrillen against Matis Zarovs. This fight's been building for quite some time, and we've seen on our social media page. Check out on YouTube. These two came face to face. You were the only thing separating them. Certainly no love lost between these two.
No, I mean, this is one of the most organic rivalries that you'll ever see. Like, this fight was so close to coming together in December, and they were already getting into it back then. And unfortunately, it just didn't come about for a variety of different reasons. I've worked hard to get this fight back on the table this time around, and we came to terms. The thing is, both of these guys really wanted to fight one another, so it was just a case of working out the details. And McGrillen is a very aggressive, dangerous fighter. But, he's coming off a loss. I mean, that's a really difficult position for a young man to be in. The fact
Also,
that he's
it
taking
seems
on...
like that loss for someone like Lewis, who is, let's be honest, driven by ego, coming off a loss, that goes against everything that would seem to drive him forward.
Well, absolutely, but then at the same time, he's going to take that frustration and put it back into another training camp. Like a thing like that, a fight like the December one against Wesley Meyer could go one or two ways. It could have made him realize that he didn't want to put the work in, and he wasn't going to, close the holes in his game that created that loss on his record. Or he could get back in the gym with the likes of, Kane Musa and Ibrahim Ibragimov, and working on those holes in his game to make him a better, more dangerous fighter. Like there's no doubt that whatever McGrillen does is about landing that left hand on your chin somehow. But the more complex his game is around it, just like with McGregor, the more complex McGregor's game was around the left hand, the easier it was for him to land. And what's interesting here is on the other side, you've got Mattis, who trains at SBG, who's got a very McGregor-esque style to him. Like, it's going to be a real clash because both of these guys are southpaws. Like, we've got a front foot fighter striker against a counter striker. We've got two guys that can wrestle and grapple. Like, McGrillen can take him down and ground and pound him. Mattis can fight off his back and throw submissions up and create scrambles. Like, they just fit together so well as a technical matchup. And then you add on the fact that they really, really don't like each other. We recorded the last word the other day, which is what you were referencing with me being between them. And like all the way through, it's like there's like this tension in the air, because like I'm literally, especially after what happened with Doumbé in Paris at Bellator, I'm quick to trigger now, and it's like I was just waiting for one of them to leap off a stool, and I had to jump in between them because it was very, very tense. Like they really, really want to punch each other in the face, and sometimes that eagerness can work against you as a young fighter. So it's going to be a test of discipline as well as a test of their whole skill set when they face one another.
You mentioned the last word there. You can see it on our PFL Europe YouTube channel. I watched it. Great. It was fantastic. But I've got to say, Lewis McGrillen, who is so used to being the dominant faction when it comes to the verbal exchanges. He's so loud. He's so brash. He's so eloquent often. Mattis was so calm and calculated. It was almost like a young Conor McGregor in there. And I don't know if perhaps how eloquent he was. You were in the room. Do you think that kind of got under Lewis's skin a little bit?
I certainly think the confidence was a surprise for McGrillen. McGrillen's used to being, as you said, being the overbearing energy in the room. And I would say it was very, very 50-50. Like McGrillen, of course, brings a big energy, and he's got a natural quick spark aggression that you can see that's simmering just under the surface, and that always creates a bit of space for him. You know what I mean? He always is able to hold a space very well because of that energy and that willingness to scrap at any moment. But on the other side, and it reminds me of, I mean, obviously you mentioned McGregor, and his name does get thrown around a little too often sometimes, but like just Mattis's posture, and you've got to think like Conor and John Kavanagh would have had a lot of conversations in those early days about, posture and attitude. And I can imagine them having some very deep philosophical art of war style conversations. And whether those conversations have happened with Mattis as well, or whether he's just been very observant and been paying attention while he's been on the mats at SBG. But you can certainly tell he's got that kind of good posture, strong in his position. And his confidence made this even more interesting. Like what you didn't want is McGrillen just to kind of bully over somebody and just to dominate. And I felt like we got a very kind of interesting, a very evenly matched last word, which is going to surely show you how the fight's going to play out.
You mentioned there about the John Kavanagh influence, perhaps him and Conor had conversations in years gone by about that posture. I, as a fan, assumed that was just something Conor brought with him. Do you have any inside track on that? Was that something that John Kavanagh's brought to the table?
Look, John Kavanagh is a very deep and interesting martial artist. Anyone that's had a bit of time to spend with him, and this is why so many people gravitate towards him. Like, we have to remember, like, McGregor is a fantastic fighter, but a lot of the reasons why he was so successful was because of his mentoring from John Kavanagh. And John's not only a martial artist in the gym on the mats as well. You know, he's going to take that martial arts attitude to every aspect of his life. So, you know, I would imagine having a small library of books in the gym and passing on, hey, you know, you might want to read this. And you know, there are a lot of books that martial artists at some point in their life should read. You know, The Art of War, Book of the Five Rings, the 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘. There's a few that, for me, sit on the shelf of any martial artist that's dedicated their life to it. And John Kavanagh is the kind of person that would absolutely have those books on his shelf and would pass them on to his fighters. You know, just talking about like the psychological aspects, and this is where McGregor really excelled. Was part of the reason was his quick-wittedness, his confidence, his brashness, but his posture. Like, look at the way that he would stand when he was facing off with people, when he was walking out. You know, he would make himself look a lot bigger. You know, this is something that no doubt he's taken from the animal kingdom. You know, there are a lot of species out there that make themselves look more imposing as a way of like dominating an interaction. You know, it's interesting, but you've got to take into account that there's a depth in that gym, in the philosophical side of martial arts, that I feel has been passed on to Mattis as well.
Just great to hear you talk about that kind of stuff. My reading list is expanding during this conversation. Another fight that I can't wait to see. It's our co-main event. Kane Mousah versus Dylan Tooke. You talk about fireworks. This one is certainly a fire hazard in Newcastle this weekend.
Dylan Tooke. Kane the Danger Mousah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Dylan Tooke, he's always been quite a chaotic. Well, he's chaotic anyway, just generally. Like at the face-offs, ceremonial weigh-ins, all of it. He's a bit of a wild character, and that's what makes him interesting, both to watch and listen to, but also to see perform and fight. What we've seen since he's joined the PFL though is a far more calculated and mature version. You can tell that the work he's been doing with James Doolan at higher level has really taken him to a higher level. I mean, you know, excuse the pun, but I see why the gym's called that now. Aside from its height up in Scotland, but Dylan Tooke for me has turned a corner, and he needs momentum, and he needs the names on his record that are going to give him that momentum, so he can start calling out the bigger names that he wants to fight, like. Kane Mousah gave such a good performance against 𝗟𝗑𝗪𝗓, and given the fact that we're so close to Manchester and he's got such a good following, there are loads of people that want to see Kane fight that haven't been able to because he's been fighting abroad for a long while. And what you don't want is a fight where Kane's going to get either, you know, he's going to be chasing somebody down, or he's going to be dealing with someone holding on to him, or, you know, Dylan Tooke's got someone that doesn't want to engage with him. That is not the case with this fight. Like, they've both got a lot of respect for one another, but they're both going to try and murder one another on the night. Like, Kane's a very aggressive front foot fighter. He likes to take the cage away. He likes to push people back against the fence, but force them to throw first so he can counter. Then you look at what Dylan Tooke was doing against Conor Hughes, where he's moving and he's sniping and he's picking. One of these two guys has got to win that exchange. Either Dylan Tooke's going to land those sniping shots and he's going to catch Mousah on the way in, or Mousah is going to trap Dylan Tooke up against the fence and counter his initial punches. It's a fascinating matchup, and for whatever reason, as I was sitting there watching Kane Mousah have a very frustrating night against 𝗟𝗑𝗪𝗓, I thought to myself, this is an opponent for Dylan Tooke here. because both of these guys are game and get frustrated when the person's not engaging. I just think it's an interesting matchup, and I think that they both get something out of this that they need if they win. And as I've said to you before, Andy, a signature of all of my PFL Europe events is everybody is in a fight that they can absolutely win. This is a very, very 50-50 matchup, and one of them's got to take the initiative and apply their game plan.
Kane's fight against 𝗟𝗑𝗪𝗣 earlier this year. Kane was very vocal about wanting to come into PFL Europe to enter the season, and he wanted to come in at the highest level. How did you think he performed that night?
I thought he performed very well. I think we're only just starting to realize how good 𝗟𝗑𝗪𝗣𝗑 is. And it's not like it wasn't a tough night for him. Just like last year when 𝗟𝗑𝗪𝗣𝗑 won the European title, sometimes he has to work through a bit of adversity. And with Kane Moussa, he trains out in Thailand a lot. He's working with a lot of like the Dagestani wrestlers. So he's used to dealing with that heavy pressure game. I thought he gave a great account of himself. I think he felt like he let himself down because, he wasn't 100%. His conditioning wasn't on point. He felt like he faded faster than he expected to. But, again, I felt frustration coming off losses before, and it's made me perform better the next time around. So we're going to get a better version of Kane Moussa coming into this one because of that frustrating loss to 𝗟𝗑𝗪𝗣𝗑. And it also keeps Kane alongside the tournament, because if 𝗟𝗑𝗪𝗑 goes on to win the belt, Kane is definitely going to want that rematch at some point in the future. So we've got to keep that in mind as well. Where do these guys go in the future? Like 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣 wants to be a superstar for PFL Europe. To beat someone like Kane Moussa gives him that win on his record to start calling out the bigger names. And I'm not going to mention the names that he said to me, but 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣's got a list on his wall at home of people that he wants to call out. And there are some really, really fun names on there. I won't ruin that, but this is his gateway to start calling some of those people out.
If he wins, Dan, on the next one of these, I will pressure you for those names if Dylan hasn't called them. But on that point of Dylan, I remember when he first kind of came onto the scene many years ago now. And I think if you've been around the European circuit long enough, you'll have seen him. And I remember when Bellator were running shows regularly in Europe alongside BAMMA. And Dylan was kind of being primed as perhaps the next James Gallagher or a next flag bearer over here. And I think it was Cameron Ells who kind of put short to that with a very quick knockout many years ago. And Dylan didn't really feel like he recovered from that until he came here into PFL. What do you think's changed for him over the last few years to give him confidence and to make him believe that actually, yeah, I can become the superstar that I was perhaps originally destined to be?
It's a great question. And I think a big part of it is him moving to Scotland to higher level. Anybody that knows Dylan knows that his life was quite turbulent growing up. He was in a rough neighborhood, and he was always, I would imagine, with his energy and with his with his confidence, I would imagine he was always finding himself in trouble. So, Dylan's had a rather turbulent life, and I think that the one thing that he's got from moving to Glasgow to higher level to James Doolan and that team is stability and a family around him. He always talks so highly, of course, about James Doolan, who's the head coach, but also about Stevie Ray and Mark Ewan and some of the other fighters that we're bringing into the PFL soon, the likes of Lorenzo Parente, 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗑, fighters that are around him on a daily basis. He has a family around him now, and that means a lot to him, not only for his martial arts development, but also for his support in his career. And I think that's partly where his maturity's come from as well. I think he's realized that he's got the right people around him that he can give this a real good go. And if he's just there for a scrap and he's not doing his skills justice, then he's working against himself. And that's why I think we're seeing far more sharper strategic performances from him now.
I can't wait for that one. Just on a side note, you mentioned Stevie Ray there. We're going to Glasgow later in the year. Do you think you might get Stevie Ray back into a PFL cage? Maybe this time as a heavyweight? The guy has got massive.
Man, he is so physically imposing now, isn't he? Yeah, I've had a few conversations about Stevie Ray. I would very much like him to be on that Glasgow card. I'm hoping to be able to announce something soon. But yeah, I mean, as far as Stevie and his martial arts prowess, he gets better and better. I know his last couple of fights have been rough, but they were at the top against very tough individuals. And you know, I feel like now he's had a bit of time and his life around MMA settled down a bit. I feel like he's got maybe a couple more good bangers in him, and I'll certainly enjoy matching him and calling those fights. I will say that.
I can't wait to see Steve Ray in maybe a light heavyweight fight. We'll see.
Savannah Marshall becomes world champion.
The PFL believe in me that much that they're taking me back to my hometown. One thing I hope I can keep is my power. It's new, it's fresh, it's exciting for me. So just as long as I'm prepared for everything, that's the key. It's going to be an absolute insane night. It's going to be wild.
Hey, but Dan, let's move on to our main event. So much mainstream press around this one, so much attention throughout the combat sports world. The mixed martial arts debut of two-weight boxing world champion, two-time Olympian, one of the greatest female boxers on the planet, Savannah Marshall. How much of an inside track have you got on how her training's been going?
I've been speaking to Andy Aspinall. I was up at the gym a few days ago, just watching her train, and you know, I'm excited for her. I think, given the fact that she was such a successful boxer and the way that she was successful as well, she was imposing, she was on the front foot, she was bullying, you know, pushing people around, using her forearms, but at the same time, you know, she's got tremendous knockout power, and that's in the big gloves. You know, you put her in small gloves and you give her big pockets to find, you know, those punches through. She's going to be an incredibly dangerous individual, and when you've got a skill set like that, what you don't want to do is you don't want to step into an MMA gym and go, right, I need to learn MMA before I make my debut, because you're going to find yourself there for 20 years. You're going to realize that there's still, you know, 95% of it to learn. Trust me, I'm learning this myself every day. I'm like, oh my goodness, this cupboard's got another cupboard in the back of it. It just goes on and on and on. And it can be very, very overwhelming, especially if you're making your MMA debut. Because she's got Andy Aspinall there in her corner, coaching her on a daily basis. She's got Tom Aspinall there, of course, who's the UFC heavyweight champ. Like, you've got two people there who have got tremendous amount of knowledge and experience in developing you into an MMA fighter. Like, Andy Aspinall had Tom Aspinall as a little boy, and he was teaching him the necessary things to make him a good overall fighter. And he did a fantastic job, of course, because Tom's proved his system right. Now, if I'm Andy Aspinall and Savannah walks into my gym, I'm not going to go, right, let's start learning triangles and heel hooks, because she's a great boxer. So what I would be thinking about is giving her some takedown defense and some anti-clinch and a good awareness of what she might see on the floor, the highest percentage submissions, and how to escape them. So you build a game, an MMA game around Savannah to support the skills that she's already got as a boxer. And if she went to a random MMA gym, I wouldn't be confident that that's happened. But knowing that she's been training with Andy Aspinall, I just know he's got a very systematic approach to his coaching, and I know that she'll have been applied with she'll have been given the skills that she needs to apply on the night to be able to make her boxing work.
And she's fighting against 𝗟𝗏 Vargas. This is, I think sometimes people from the outside think, oh, they're going to bring in a superstar from another sport, little light touch opponent to get them in. That's not what's happened here, Dan.
I had this conversation with Savannah, and I said, look, like, MMA debut, like, I'm really, really excited. MMA debut, I think you're going to do fantastic. We don't have journeymen in MMA, and we certainly don't have journeymen in PFL Europe events. Like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find you an opponent that's going to be the right test for your MMA debut, but also someone that's not going to be terrified of fighting Savannah Marshall in 4-ounce gloves. Like, I would be intimidated to fight Savannah Marshall in 4-ounce gloves. She can punch. She could knock me out cold in front of a sold-out arena in Newcastle. Nobody wants that, especially not me. But 𝗟𝗏 Vargas, she's a 2-time kickboxing world champion. She's got a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She's been competing in all different kinds of combat sports, and now she's just recently crossed over into mixed martial arts. Now she's had 3 fights. She won the first one by knockout in 12 seconds, and then she's lost 2 to the same opponent. So she's had a very, very kind of early taste of what mixed martial arts is, but she knows that she can punch. She knows that she can strike. She knows from her jiu-jitsu competitions that she can grapple as well. And she knows that she's dealing with an Olympic level boxer. So, you know, I would expect her to use all the skills that Savannah's going to be uncomfortable with to get the fight won. And I wanted this to feel like a dangerous opponent for Savannah. So first of all, she trains seriously. And second of all, so she can walk out into an arena and feel those nerves again, because she hasn't felt that for a while in boxing.
But that purple belt in jiu-jitsu is something that really stands out for me looking at this. I mean, look, Savannah Marshall, we know as a striker, is going to be unmatched. But how much of your ground game, your defense, your submissions, can you develop in the 6 or 12 months she's been training? Is the game plan, you think, for Morella just to go to ground?
I mean, I think that's the obvious game plan. So, like, if I'm Morella, I'm probably thinking, no, I'm not going to do that, because what would make more sense for me if I ultimately want to get the fight to the floor, I don't want to make it too obvious. And if Savannah comes out in the first round and she's like, right, I'm going to get taken down straight away here, that her primary focus is to stop the takedown and keep the fight on the feet. So if Morella starts off with that as a game plan, it might just kind of play into the hands of Savannah's game, defend the takedown, and then get to the striking. Whereas because Morella's got a good kickboxing background as well, and she's got that 12-second knockout in her MMA debut, she might come out and be like, right, let me show you what kicking feels like. And she might decide she wants to stay striking for a little while and get Savannah into a kickboxing match and then take it to the floor. Like this is why she's going to be a difficult test, is because she's got skills in all ranges. And, you know, she can take Savannah into places that are uncomfortable. That's what's making Savannah nervous going into this fight. And that's what's meaning that she's showing up every day and she's putting the work in on the mats. I want Savannah, if she gets a victory on June 8th, to be able to step out of the cage and feel like she has achieved something that is on par with what she would have achieved in boxing. You know, and that's a big ask, because she's already achieved so much. But if the trajectory is for her to fight Claressa Shields in MMA, like, she's going to want revenge there. And she's going to want to make sure she looks like a very well-rounded MMA fighter when she gets to that Claressa Shields fight. So she needs the right fights in the build-up.
Yeah, I think that's the fight we're all building towards. We know that Don Davis and Pete Murray, that's one of the big reasons why I think they've seen Savannah Marshall and want to pick her up, because of the history she's got with Claressa. Of course, Savannah beat her in the amateurs. Claressa avenged that in the pro ranks. So they kind of want a piece. And I think they're very keen to get it on inside the cage. You've seen both fighters. Let's say Savannah develops a little bit more. How do you see that fight playing out in the cage?
It honestly really depends on the direction that Morella wants to take it, and whether Savannah can deal with the wrestling component. You know, like, you've got to think that she's spent a lot of time thinking about what happens if I get taken down. Like, how much of a fish out of water am I going to be if I get taken down? Which means that she's probably having dreams about takedown defense. And hopefully they're dreams. Hopefully they're not nightmares. You know what I mean? Because we don't want her to find herself in a nightmare on June 8th where she just gets taken down and she can't get back up, and all of a sudden it's not a competitive fight for her. And she doesn't want that either. You know, it's one of the reasons why it's so fascinating when someone moves over from another combat sport into mixed martial arts, whether it's, you know, boxing or kickboxing or judo or whatever. They're opening themselves up to a whole bunch of skills that they've not encountered previously in their career. And that's going to play on their mind a little bit. And it can either motivate you or it can break you. And what I've seen in Savannah is, I say to her, how's your training going? She's like, yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I said, and what about the grappling? She's like, you know, when I'm retired, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep, like, and straight away I think to myself, look, she's enjoying herself. She's having a good time. And that is 50% of the battle of learning, you know? Like, kids don't learn if they're not enjoying themselves, do they? Like, and we're all big kids. And Savannah, I would imagine, as long as she's enjoying her process of learning, she's going to learn quicker. And, I mean, anybody training alongside Tom Aspinall is going to be doing a lot of laughing anyway. It's a good vibe in that gym.
You mentioned that Savannah said how much she's enjoying the ground game. And actually, I bumped into her in a hotel a few months ago, and she said the same thing to me. And we know we're building towards, we all hope, that Claressa Shields match inside the smart cage. Claressa in Saudi earlier this year kind of showed and said how little she likes going to ground. So I think if all goes to plan, somewhere down the line, Savannah and Claressa will come together inside the PFL smart cage. Obviously, not a lot of data on Savannah right now inside mixed martial arts. We'll get more after this weekend. But right now, how would you see Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall MMA match going down?
Well, okay, so it's a good question. So if I go back to their last fight in boxing, and I think to myself, how would this look slightly different if they weren't wearing shoes and were wearing small gloves? Like the way that Savannah fights, this is one of the reasons why I said it to you, is her style of boxing crosses over into MMA very, very well. Like if we look at what 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘 was doing in her last fight, you know, she won the fight, she showed some sub defense, but the thing that I was expecting was more composure with her striking, with her boxing, especially because like when I interviewed her going into fight week, she said like I want to be a boxer in MMA. I want to show people like how good my hands are and that I can do them in boxing or in mixed martial arts, and that basically means that her skill set is always going to be gravitating towards the boxing, and she's going to learn whatever grappling she needs to remain in the boxing range. Savannah on the other side is like, I want to kick people in the head. I want to choke people out. So like straight away, Savannah's starting to fill out a martial arts skill set based on enthusiasm alone. And if I see the way that they come together as strikers in mixed martial arts, when Savannah can grab her on the back of the head, or she can overhook her, or she can, you know what I mean, near in the guts or whatever, they're all things that I think Savannah could really easily fit into her game that would make Claressa very, very uncomfortable straight away. And just the fact that one of them's really enjoying the grappling and the other one really doesn't enjoy it, again, it leads me to feel that as long as Savannah can maintain, you know, her enjoyment of mixed martial arts, even when it does get tough, I think we could see her choking Claressa Shields out if they fought in MMA. That wouldn't surprise me at all. And that would be a real statement for Savannah to be like, well, look, I beat you as an amateur and I've just choked you out as an MMA fighter. Like, and now we can box again if you like, but that's the only way you've beat me so far. You know, an amateur boxing and pro boxing is very different. Like an MMA fight between the two, I would already favor Savannah just purely based on the style of boxer that she is.
I love a Dan Hardy breakdown, even about a speculative fight right now. And I'm pretty sure in maybe months or a year or two to come, we'll be pulling that clip and seeing if you're accurate. Look, Dan, thank you for breaking this down. We've got to wrap this up because, you know, we've got fights to go and announce in just a few days' time. A stacked card from top to tail. Who is going to make it to the PFL Europe playoffs? Who is going to make it through and have an incredible display on our showcase bouts? What will Savannah Marshall bring to her mixed martial arts debut? We're going to find out along with you this Saturday night live on DAZN. Come and join me, Dan, Sean O'Connell, Stefan Struve. A whole bunch of us are going to be there in Newcastle for this landmark event. We'll see you there.
From the very beginning, Newcastle has been a nucleus of revolution. A city of grafters, the Toon has always been up for the fight. And as a new revolution sweeps the sporting world, Newcastle is once again at the epicenter.
And the world is watching!
On June the 8th, Newcastle's 𝗘𝗨𝗥𝗢𝗣𝗘 Arena plays host to a new era of mixed martial arts. As the world's fastest growing promotion comes to the Toon. One night, 15 fights with plenty on the line.
Like nothing else I've ever seen. Oh, there it is!
We've got crossover. The undisputed boxing champion of the world, Savannah Marshall, makes her global MMA debut against experienced grappler and kickboxer Mirella Vargas of Brazil. Savannah wants to meet Claressa again. She's a local hero with global ambitions.
Everybody is on their feet.
We've got the next generation of exciting mixed martial artists. We've got the female fighters looking to grow women's fight sports and inspire a generation. We've got bad blood.
Smash up your neck in.
We've got returning champions. This is one event in the grueling PFL Europe season where fighters can become global stars.
Crowd, the energy, I've never experienced anything like it.
With 16 nations represented, 9 win or go home fights, and the MMA debut of Savannah Marshall topping the bill. You don't want to miss it. Live from the Utilita Arena, Newcastle, on Saturday, June the 8th. This is Europe's MMA League. This is PFL Europe.